Welcome into the Hot Read Podcast live for Wednesday, September the 4th. This is going to sound weird, and I don't know how long it's going to take me to get used to it, but I am your host, JT Ruhnke, writer here at Broadway Sports Media. You can follow me at JT_Ruhnke, and we have finally made it. The Hot Read Podcast coup d'etat has finally come and gone, and sitting next to me is my new co-host. You probably know him, but if you are unaware, this is Stoney Keeley, editor-in-chief of the Sobros Network, 1/3 of football and other F words, and of course writes for stackingtheinbox.com. Stoney, how are we doing?
You nailed it. Host JT, the people's champ, is here. Finally anointed. I'm happy to be here, man. I am excited. For those that might not know me, I might be a new face for some. I'm a pretty simple guy. I love the Tennessee Titans. I love the NFL draft. I love Gatlinburg, Tennessee. I love Yankee Candle, and I write poetry. And that's about all you need to know about me. I am stoked, feeling pretty good today. How are you feeling as we kick off a new era for the Hot Read podcast?
I am just like you. I am stoked, but my flame was a little bit, it was a little bit snuffed out before the show, because right before us we had another show, a football show on 440 Podcast Network.
Another ball knower show.
Another ball knower show, because this one will also continue to be a ball knower show. But I had to bring this up at the start of the show here. Paul Kaharski had some choice words to say and alluded a little bit to our show that the 440 Network should move towards the host and co-host wearing collared shirts and no hats. And yet here we are, two men in t-shirts and hats. And we currently have a lot of thoughts going around in our head right now about this new proposed idea for the 440 Sports Network. I'm just going to tell you right now, that ain't never going to happen, because this show is for the relaxed Titans enjoyers, the Titans talkers that just want to sit here and have a good time and chit chat, like so many of you already are in the comments here. Yeah. I don't think you'll ever see me or Stoney in a combination of no hat and collared shirt on this show ever, and that's a guarantee.
What's next? Are we going to have to cut our hair? Are we going to have to shave our beards? What is Paul trying to make 440
He's
Sports?
Trying to make us like Yankees? The Yankees. That's what. Yes, that's
Come
what
on.
you're. Oh my gosh, he's trying to make us the Yankees. And I'm wearing my. I don't think my outfit's too bad. I'm wearing my throwback 2000s Subway Series, World Series shirt, and it's got the as Paul would say, it's got the winner Yankees and the loser Mets on it. So I'm kind of appeasing him there. I've got a hat on that I don't think is too. Yeah. It's not too offensive, I would say. It's just a little ghost on my head. I don't think it's hurting anybody, but we'll have to continue to see if this new rule gets any more push from the 440 Network.
I do wear some pretty heinous t-shirts at times, but like I was telling you earlier, I've worked very hard to get to the spot where I can just wear a hat and a t-shirt on a broadcast. I wanted to do things my way, and I've done it so far. Am I still recording from a spare bedroom in the corner of my home? Yes. I'm not in some fancy studio, but I'm happy.
And I think we are happy that you are here as well, as clearly there are so many people in the comments joining us, which is a great segue into, not to cut you off, but if you want to join the conversation here and welcome Stoney in, like so many of you have, like D Good saying this is the first show post Easton and it already has a better start time. That's one guarantee. We'll start more consistently there. Jake in the comments, QB coach McAvoy, James, even Easton saying hello from the bleachers. If you guys want to join the conversation here, head on over to Broadway Sports Media or 440 YouTube page, and that's where you can join the comments like everybody here. Another new thing on this show that you might notice in the top left of your corner of the stream here. I'm excited to announce that this show is also presented by Sinkers Beverages and Byproduct Bluegrass Beverages. If you know 440, you know them, but if you are just a sole listener of the Hot Read podcast, we are excited to have them on board as one of our sponsors presenting this show, making it free for all of you guys. More on that later in the show. Once again, thank you. Super excited to have them on board here, but I think it's time we get into some, Titans topics. We can talk about as many shirts and hats that we want to wear on this show whenever
JT,
we want.
I did prepare a statement for my
Oh,
first episode on this show.
okay. Yeah,
If you
no,
don't
by all
mind,
means.
I'll keep it quick. First order of business, as I sit here in the chair on the Hot Read podcast, no more Cliff Kingsbury slander on this podcast. Way more Trevor Lawrence slander on this podcast.
Wow. I
I want.
mean,
Go ahead. Sorry.
I was just gonna say, Easton said hello from the bleachers, but I'm pretty sure he's packed his bags and he's out the door. We might have just lost a viewer right there.
Well,
Yeah.
I think if Easton will have to catch this on the replay then, because I do want to say a quick word to him before getting started here. I've got a lot of respect for what he and for what you have built on this podcast over the last 3 years. I know it can't be easy to say goodbye to something that you've put so much care into. I do keep that in mind, and I take this opportunity seriously. I'm grateful for it. You can listen to Easton for 5 minutes and hear the talent that he has for broadcasting. So I wish him nothing but the best moving forward. But I want to share something with the people viewing on YouTube live right now that prior to this moment has only stayed between the two of us. I shared with you one-on-one on January 31st, 2024. I wrote the date down. When we were down in Mobile, Alabama for the Senior Bowl, I said, man, you really know your shit. There's my one non-FCC word for the show. Zach and I are sitting here like, damn, JT's on it. Well done, bud. You've crushed it down here. Now, I can get along with anybody. I like most people, but the number of people that I truly respect is quite small. You earned my respect on that trip. And as for my place on this show, I want to deliver thoughtful coverage of this team for the people gracious enough to give you and I their attention. And I want to make sure that they see the talent in you that I do. A wise man named Denard Wilson once said, a dog is a disciplined asshole with grit. And I say we got two dogs on the Hot Read podcast, and it's time we turn them loose. And thank you to Sinkers Beverages and Bluegrass Beverages.
Yes, thank you once again. that was a beautiful speech. Makes me even that more fired up to have you on this show. It could have been something that we started all over with a brand new person. Technically, I know I call this the Hot Read Pod 2 Electric Boogaloo. It's technically the third one because we cannot forget, James Foster, of course.
Can't forget James.
Our forefathers that have come before us. However,
yeah.
I am so excited to, bring this in, kind of shape it into this new mold. And, like you said, thank you to Easton once again. Also, congratulations to him on accepting that offer from A to Z. I'm so excited as one of his closest friends to continue to see him only go up and up. But I'm just as excited here to kind of continue to deliver you guys some of the best content that I personally can give you guys and give you a unique spin on the Tennessee Titans. I think when we were, just a little bit more of an aside before we get into those Titans topics,
we better hurry. We're going to lose James.
We're going to lose
comments.
When we were, thinking about what we would do with the Hot Read podcast, me and Easton, I really came to the conclusion of I could either just kind of let it go and you figure something else out or continue it on. And I said, I'd be damned if I did not at least try my best to continue this show on, because I think so many of you, we've created a community out here that I think everybody really enjoys. And, we used to do it on a Sunday, Tuesday and Thursday. Schedule's going to change a little bit. We're going to be doing Tuesday and Friday afternoons now. Maybe give you a little bit more of a show that's a little bit more variety on Fridays with I know someone said in the comments there, the Best Bet Gauntlets coming back. Had to bring it back because it is just so profitable and we make so much money on this show, which is a big reason why you should be tuned in on those Fridays. But also on your drive home at the end of the week, just give you some content like that and talk a little bit about the Titans, which I think is a good segue into the Tennessee Titans. They are a football team.
Titans.
They're a football team, and they do have a football game this week. I think Braden on a football show, he says into training camp, there are football people doing football things on a football field. I would like to amend that and say this week there are football people doing football things on a football field for real. It actually is going to matter this upcoming week. And so we could sit here and we could, debate, oh, are they going to, what's the score? What's the win-loss record here of, a game that's going to happen in 7 weeks or so. But I think that's a little bit childish and a little bit silly. That's kind of my viewpoint of it. I think we've shared a lot about our expectations for this team, but I think we should look into this interesting conversation that I want to pose here about what a successful Titans season looks like. Does it actually mean above 500 wins? Does it, or above 500 record, more wins than losses? Or can it be something a little different? And I think that's the first thing before we get into what are the keys for the Titans to be successful. It should be more of a, what would you be content with if the Titans were to maybe go below 500, but these certain things would happen, would say you'd feel pretty good about where this team is and the state of this franchise. And so I wrote a couple of them down that I think, I want to play back off of you and maybe some people in the comments, if you would like to join in here and say, yes, I do think that it would be a successful season if this were to happen. And I think the first one is if Will Levis looks like an above average quarterback. And by saying that, if the Titans were to go, let's say 8-9 or, 7-10 or something like that, it probably doesn't mean that Will Levis set the league on fire, right? Like, he's not going to come in here and throw for 4,500 yards and 35 touchdowns and the Titans somehow still end up below 500. I just don't see that happening. But if they were to go 7-10, 8-9, probably means that Will Levis probably had some more good moments than bad, maybe put a little bit more consistency together and looked like a viable starter in the league. And so would that be enough for you, even if they were to go below 500, to consider this a successful season?
Yeah, I would say so, JT. I've got a number at 8 or 9 wins, and I think you have to be reasonable about where this team is at right now because we just heard PK and Braden talking about the overhaul of this roster, how many new faces are going to be in starting positions. This is going to take a little bit of time to gel. And we're not even talking about the injury bug, which is the ultimate cop-out when you talk about these keys to success and what success is. Well, stay healthy. Yeah, no duh. Makes sense. But I think you have to look at how this team gels, how long it takes to get there, and the light bulb going off. And I just don't think that the team in its current iteration is deep enough to withstand a few key injuries and still be competitive. So for me, I'm okay with 8 or 9 wins still being a reasonable mark of success. This is a talented roster. If they can avoid the injury bug and gel schematically, they could have a higher ceiling. And I mean, the talent on paper, you look at it, I think does indicate a higher ceiling, but they have to be competitive. And we say competitive a lot, but last year's Titans were competitive. They just lost a lot of those games. So there's another element of this success. You want to see them start to win a few of those. So I think if they can huddle around the pack, and I'll talk about my keys to finding that success, but the middle of the pack, I think, is a fine place for this team to be. I'll personally be okay with that if they're around 8 or 9 wins by season's end.
And I think that's a big one, right? The main one that we'll continue to focus on here is Will Levis and how he looks. And I think Zedine in the comments brings up a really interesting point where he says success would be a 2022 Detroit Lions type season. The foundation gets built and all the signs are there. And then 2025, they put it all together, which to me, with so many, sexy signings in the offseason and free agency, bringing in L'Jarius Sneed, Cheeto, Calvin Ridley, Tony Pollard, all of these guys, it kind of muddled the vision that we were being preached to about in the sense that this team will take some time to put together under Brian Callahan here.
Yeah.
And that 2025 may be a more realistic option for this team in terms of competing. And so then, since then, we've seen J.C. Latham come onto this team and look like a pretty good shot to be their cornerstone left tackle. T'Vondre Sweat continues to look really good on the defense next to Jeffrey Simmons. Of course, we haven't seen them both in action, but we've seen the two pieces apart. Putting together only makes sense that they probably will, play off of each other. And all of a sudden, you're thinking about aspirations of a team that could really look to cause some damage this year. But I think you bring up a great point. This team is so fragile on the back end, and I think that's what we'll get to with some of these keys here, that if one thing were to fall off the wagon here, it could just mean the wagon falls apart in itself. And so
Sure.
I think two more kind of success defining options could be for this team. Let's say like two of Ridley, D-Hop, Boyd, maybe even Burks, if that is some universe out there in the multiverse. If two of those four were to somehow go for 1,000, I think that also shows you that even if they didn't win a lot of games, Will Levis kind of has the chops to be a quarterback who can deal the ball out early and often, and also means that, at least in Calvin Ridley's perspective, you have a viable wide receiver core, which is something that you've not had in Tennessee since A.J. Brown. And then I think the other one could be along the lines of maybe a 2022 Detroit Lions team, is that the defense, which we continue to talk up, ranks in the top 10 in metrics, or maybe top 10 in points allowed, but they still are not finding games because the offense continues to struggle to click, which I think is another reality. So those are some of the things that could define the success. But now let's talk about some that have to happen if this team is going to have success. And the first one, if you want to go first, I'll give the floor to you, but I do have one that's been kind of mulling over in my mind over the past 2 days since we heard Brian Callahan speak.
We both have that one on our list, but I have one that I feel comes before it. So let me get this one out of the way, and then we can talk about yours, because I've got yours on my list as well. But it's a new offensive line group. There are a lot of new faces up there. It figures to be a new scheme. We expect it to be a new scheme. This unit, while we know it's been the same 5 guys for quite some time now, the revolving door of tackles has ended. It still has to be executed on the field. This group still needs to gel. And we know this unit has an exponential impact on the offense, because look how disastrous it was last year for the offense, with disastrous offensive line play performance. So I think the foundation of achieving the success as we've defined it is how quickly can that offensive line group come together. And if they can, then I think we could be cooking pretty early with this run game, which I know segues into the point that you wanted to bring up.
Yeah, I think the run game and the offensive line kind of work hand in hand, and it's something that I think has been pretty surprising to me, as Brian Callahan has talked about. Maybe not Brian Callahan, so to say, but a lot of the talk around this team has been bringing Brian Callahan in means this becomes a new age offense. People want to think it's the idea of what a Sean McVay or a Kyle Shanahan runs, where you're designing a lot of looks downfield and doing a lot more passing than the rushing. But I think as we've continued to look at them in the preseason, it's become more apparent to me that establishing the run for this team probably is going to come first before they really unlock that passing potential. Like, I think there's a difference between establishing the run, but not having it be your identity. And so yesterday I threw out a thought that got a pretty decent amount of traction, but I said, as much as Titans fans want to see Will Levis sling it, Brian Callahan's continued emphasis on the run game, it piques my interest. And of course, everybody also called out that I didn't know how to spell peak, but you know,
don't out yourself. You're not showing the tweet on the screen.
Hey,
now people know.
I'm a humble person, you know. I admit my faults, and so I continued and said, could see a reality where Callahan's offense is run heavy early in the season as Levis and company settle in, and I think that's a big sticking point there, and something that as we talk about later this week, this Bears versus Titans matchup, I think you see first and foremost this team try to establish the run. And so maybe not to rain on Titans fans parade, but I don't think you're going to see Will Levis maybe sling it 30 times this first game because of, trying to get him comfortable. And I think the biggest thing with Callahan, and what really turned me on to that idea, was that yesterday, and this is from an excerpt from Jim Wyatt's article from that press conference, he says, and I quote, Callahan noted the importance of running the ball effectively on Sunday with backs Tony Pollard and Tyjae Spears, 2 backs he called perfect for the offense because they both have the ability to be 3-pronged players. Because they run the ball well, they're good in the pass game, and they protect well. The running game will be key on Sunday in Chicago, Callahan said. We're going to make sure we run the ball well, Callahan said. It's something we're going to pride ourselves on, being able to run it and run it well. And as much as they want to do that in this first game, I think it goes without saying that they need to be able to run the ball well in every single game, because I think it sets up what they want to do with Will Levis better than Will Levis can carry this team by himself.
Yeah, and I think Titans fans are going to be so ticked off that the formula for winning early on in this season is likely going to be running the ball and playing defense kind of deal, after longing to get away from that for so long. But I think it's the most realistic path for them early on in the season as the passing game continues to develop chemistry, because that's been an issue recently. The final few days of training camp, people were still bringing it up like, hey, this isn't really coming along the way that we thought it would be at this point. So I think they will lean on the run game. But to add a layer to that, JT, I think the personnel dictates what you do here, because you have offensive linemen that are powerful in JC Latham, and what we've seen from Lloyd Cushenberry, Goldberg spearing people down the field. But then you've also got the athletic Peter Skoronski. Dylan Radins is a good athlete. NPF is a good athlete. The technician in Peter Skoronski to run more of the power concepts that we expect Bill Callahan to run as the run game coordinator here. To the emphasis placed on technique and the proper footwork to get out of your stance, to turn and pull, to come across the formation, to hit the right guy, to hit your marks where you're supposed to hit them. This is an offensive lineman that, from a skill set perspective, it is tailor-made to run Bill Callahan's scheme. Now, again, I hark back to the question being, how quickly can they put it all together and execute on the field? They also keep 5 tight ends, and they have 2 very distinct roles for their tight ends, with Wiley and Big Tom O and Nick Vanette kind of fitting into one bucket. I know Brian Callahan's probably fainting somewhere listening to me put players in buckets like this, but David Martin Robinson, Chigakonkwo kind of fitting another role. There are multiple things that these guys can do. And even like you mentioned the quote from the presser about the running backs, a 3-pronged skill set. These guys are going to they're going to run a diversified run scheme. So I don't expect it to be a lot of line up and pound the ball, but I do think they are going to run quite a bit early on to stabilize. And if the downfield passing game is not working, the Chicago Bears defense is not where they're at right now. It's not the defense that you want to test that with in week 1. So I think it's a smart strategy to deploy, to go out there and try and control the tempo of the game, run the ball effectively, and maybe take your shots when they present themselves.
Yeah, not to get a little bit too aside, but Jake in the comments says, get ready to learn run, pass, buddy. And Kenneth saying, I'm going to laugh so hard if the first 3 plays are run, pass, which would be perfectly cathartic for this entire Titans offseason, for them to maybe unfortunately go 3 and out on the first drive because it's 2 runs to Tony Pollard and an incomplete pass. And people are losing their minds on Twitter or wherever Titans fans get their fix there. I agree with you a lot on what you said, because of the fact in the last preseason game, how much 12 personnel we saw them kind of use out there with the running game. And I think that's something that I think we're going to continue to see throughout the entire season. I think it's a big reason why they kept 5 tight ends. And I know on the OTP today, Brian Callahan, said, of course, we're not going to keep 5 tight ends, active on the roster for every game. That would be pretty silly. But I think
5 personnel. 5 personnel, baby. Let's run it.
We are actually, that's actually a total lie, and he's creating a brand new offense where you put all 5 tight ends on at one time. I would love to see how that works. But I think it should show you that when you watch this game this week and throughout the season, that you should not be too scared of the running game, because the running game offers so many different capabilities with the versatility they have on that offense. You talk about, what we saw from Nick Vanette in that final preseason game, where they're lining up in 12 personnel and they're using Nick Vanette like Josh Wiley, and it leads to them getting mismatches where then Will Levis is able to throw the ball and check it down to guys like Tony Pollard. And so I think that's something that, I would not be surprised if, like you said, early in the season, as everything continues to gel and DeAndre Hopkins gets back into the mix and you start to figure out, exactly Will Levis playing more than 2 drives in a game, how this how it checks down to who gets what and how much everybody gets. I think you're going to see a heavy reliance on the run game early, and it needs to be effective.
Yeah, I'm with you. I like Zeding's comment here asking about the slow start that the Bengals offense has historically had the recent years. I'm curious to get your thoughts on that because Brian Callahan did bring that up at some point during this offseason, mentioned the slow starts that those teams had, and mentioned that as a reason that the starters would be playing some in the preseason to avoid that.
Yeah, it's kind of a double-edged sword, right? Because why did they start slow? Is it because they didn't play a lot in the preseason, or is it because Joe Burrow has not had a healthy training camp since
Yeah.
he came into the league, right? I think if you look at last year's, I think the year before, I would give you that benefit of the doubt and say, yes, this kind of squad started really slow. But last year, I think it falls into that other bucket. So we bring up buckets again that Joe Burrow just did not have time or, was not really feeling himself to begin the season. And so I think those are two different options for Brian Callahan's slow start. But I think the big change here is that now that he is the head honcho, unlike Zach Taylor's team, they did play some of their starters in these games. And that's something that you can even look at with the Bengals again. Zach Taylor, I don't believe, maybe for one series in the first game, but Zach Taylor did not start any of his starters in games 2 or 3. So I think that's a different philosophical rift between those two guys and what makes Brian Callahan kind of his own coach there. But I mean, maybe if we do see them get off to a very historical slow start, you might be able to point back to maybe going back into those Bengals offenses and seeing, okay, why is that the reason? But we'll have to see. I think it'll be really interesting. And then again, I think the one thing that hasn't started slow for the Bengals in previous years is Joe Mixon in that run game. That's kind of been their saving grace in a lot of those games, and I think it's going to be no different here.
Maybe that's the thing that's been holding them back. Maybe they've been too committed to the run early. And now we're sitting here preaching, oh, they're going to run the ball early. And that's their clearest path to success early, when no, it's just air it out. We could just be completely wrong. Who knows?
It could be. But, that's the great thing because we finally get to get answers. And then we can either celebrate or we can eat crow next week. And that'll be perfect.
Yeah.
Moving on to outside of the running game, what is your next key to success here that the Titans have to have go right, or this needs to happen for them to have a successful season?
So when the offensive line gels, they're able to run the ball more effectively, and Will Levis plays a little more reined in style of quarterback, less risk taking. They've talked about getting his completion percentage up because usually that means you're taking safer underneath throws and racking those numbers up. I think a more efficient quarterback performance from Will Levis is the next step for this offense, the next building block that you can build on top of. And ultimately it leads to needing to connect on those deep shots once the opportunity is there. I think that's kind of the full evolution of where this offense goes this season. How quickly does the offensive line gel? Are they able to utilize that and run the ball effectively? Is Will Levis playing a more efficient style of quarterback? And are they actually landing the deep shots when they get there? I think if those four things connect in that order, I think the offense is going to be pretty good.
Yeah, you want to see that maybe at least happen down the stretch. I think it is a pretty tall task for this team to start right out from the gate. With the Bears, having Jalen Johnson, Tyreek Stevenson in his second year, he looked very impressive last year. You move on to the Jets and you have Sauce Gardner in their pretty good secondary. And then you go to the Packers and maybe Jair Alexander kind of making that resurgence here. Them also getting Xavier McKinney as well. Those are the guys that this team is going to have to go up against. And I think it's going to be a really big test for them because in the limited action that we saw, some of these Titan starters go up against ones, in case in point, Quandre Diggs, you saw them struggle. And so I think that with them, it's going to be that challenge, but it might not happen right away. But I agree with you. If by end of the season, like you said, they're maybe below 500, but Will Levis has continued to flash those great moments where he's absolutely slinging the ball down the field and he's doing them more consistently along with the dink and dunk of the check down game. I think you have a guy you can build around for the foreseeable future on your hands. And once again, I think it really just comes down to how long that takes versus, if it at all. I don't think it's an if. I think it is a when in that case.
Yeah, and I would agree, man. I think the big question for all of this that we're talking about is just how quickly can things fall into place. That being the pressing question, and preaching a little bit of patience in the fan base that if it looks clunky these first couple of weeks, do consider the defensive matchup against the secondaries that you mentioned they're going up against, and that it just kind of takes some time to develop that chemistry. So if it's not there in the first quarter, first half of the season, it's not time to panic just yet, but you do want to see some signs of life by the end of the season to be considered a successful campaign.
I do think the first place that you could maybe see that that Titans offense really throw it and chuck it down the field and it works a lot, it's probably against the softest cornerback group that they're going to go up against in that week 5 game off the bye against the Colts. Like I think we might be able to see that, they struggle in these first 4 games, and who knows, maybe in a month and a half now we're back on the show saying, okay, like we've preached maybe to give this team a little bit of grace because of the rooms they were going up against. Now they're coming off the bye against the Colts here, and now it's really go time, and that's where we start to see that success maybe, and that's their true test if they're able to do it against competition that they should be beating relatively early and often on that side of the ball.
Wise words. I think you want to be starting your Titans in that game if you're in the fantasy world, starting your Calvin Ridleys and your DeAndre Hopkins.
Yes. So before we move on with a couple more keys here, let's talk a little bit about our new sponsor that is presenting our show, Sinkers Beverages. Of course, if you know the 440, you know them, but if you don't, they have been serving East Nashville for 4 decades. They are 3-time Best of Nashville Liquor Store of the Year for all of your beer, wine, spirit needs. Sinkers Beverages is the place to be. And what's even better, they have a special membership called the In Crowd that you can join for special benefits, allocations, events. I know they do weekly tastings of new things that they get in stock, as well as sending you emails of when new things drop and they get new things in stock, as well as special events that you can buy some spirits and some things that are not actually on the market. You can also search Sinkers on Uber Eats and have booze delivered right to your house. I know Jake was saying it earlier in the age-old 440 line here. They drive so you can drink.
Boom.
Also have to give a shout out to Bluegrass Beverages in Hendersonville, serving the local community for over 50 years. Once again, it's just another great opportunity for local businesses to support local businesses. Shop local at Sinkers Beverages or Bluegrass Beverages in Hendersonville, wherever you need your liquor needs. I know Stoney, when we got this, they told me to go check it out. I definitely have perused, at least online, their selection of bourbon. As a big bourbon guy, and my family is a big bourbon family, I started texting my dad. I was like, this place is legit. They got all the favorites. They got all the fixins here. Definitely for me, I think that's one of my favorite aspects of Sinkers Beverages. So if you are like me and love your bourbon fix, you got to get over there to East Nashville and pick some up for yourself.
Man, and it's Oktoberfest season too, and I hark back to the live show that Zach and I did previewing the 2023 season at Bluegrass Beverages last year. And when I walked into that place, I said Oktoberfest, and they pointed me to their seasonal corner over there, and they had some stuff that I ain't ever heard of before in my life. And so I've already told my wife, I'm like, hey, it's Oktoberfest season. We don't have anything on the calendar this weekend. We're going to have to make a trip out there to Bluegrass Beverages, and we might just make a big circle because I love, driving in the fall with the wind blowing through my hair. Just make a day trip out of it. Head out to Bluegrass Beverages and then circle around East Nashville to Sinkers Beverages.
I think we nailed it for our first show right there. Boom.
Did we?
There we go. I think so. I mean, 440 approves. So
you know what? They're the people that should approve. So I'm glad. I'm happy to see that we've got that.
Let's talk about another key here. And I think we're going to go to the defensive side of the ball, a side that we really haven't talked about too much so far. And that mainly comes with the availability, I think, is a big key for this
Yes.
defense. And one in particular, cornerback's availability this season, I think, is the key to success and makes this entire defensive engine purr and run. That's L'Jarius Sneed. And he's a guy that we have talked about, not for a lot of his production or even being available on the field, but his inability to be on the field, whether it be because of veteran rest or the program that he is on with his kind of knee issues that he had stemming from Kansas City. It's a huge key, and I know that there's a lot of confidence in that building that L'Jarius Sneed is able to go, which we believe he will this week and for the foreseeable future, that he should be good to go as long as he's on his management plan. But just, when I was thinking about what are some of the keys to this side of the ball, L'Jarius Sneed kept coming back to me because of the kind of certain matchups that they're going to have this season. I know earlier today it came out kind of schedule rankings for which team has the easiest schedule and which teams have the hardest schedule. Even though they were a 4th place schedule, ended up having a 28th place schedule. And so that means they're going to be going up against a lot of prolific offenses that are scoring a lot of points. And so some of those they come with Garrett Wilson or DJ Moore in this first one.
Mm-hmm.
Keenan Allen, new rookie Roma Dunze. You look at guys like Stephon Diggs and Nico Collins with the Houston Texans. And so Tyreek Hill again with the Dolphins and Jalen Waddle. And so I went back and kind of looked at L'Jarius Sneed's production last year. I know this is something we talked about early in the offseason, but just kind of reminding you of how impactful L'Jarius Sneed can be against wide receiver ones. These are all from Next Gen Stats, but especially against Miami last season, L'Jarius Sneed allowed just 2 receptions for 20 yards on 8 targets in the Chiefs' wild card victory over Miami. And across 2 matchups that season, Sneed allowed a single reception on 8 combined targets to Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle. And then if you look at L'Jarius Sneed going up against Stephon Diggs last year, he aligned across from Stephon Diggs on 23 of his 53 routes, 65.7%, limiting him to 1 reception for 3 yards on 5 targets. And so the impact that he has against wide receiver ones cannot be overstated, but it can also be overstated that for this team, Sneed playing as that kind of shadow corner coverage, which he did last year on over 65% of routes 6 times last season, is the biggest thing that this team could lose if L'Jarius Sneed ends up not being healthy, because then you kind of look to a Cheeto Awuzie who has been a CB1 before in his career, but as he gets up there in the age and kind of gets to closer to that cliff for cornerbacks, you wonder how much more he can be that cornerback 1 in his career. You look at a guy like Roger McCreary, who projects to probably play really well in his spot as the nickel, being able to thrive in that place where he probably fits a little bit well in this scheme. But if L'Jarius Sneed is not there, everyone gets bumped up. And then you have guys like Darrell Baker and Jarvis Brownlee Jr. starting to play in there, who we, at least for Jarvis Brownlee Jr., think can develop into a nice player. But seeing him go up against, let's say L'Jarius Sneed was not able to go this week, and then you come across a team like the Bears who have 3 legit weapons, and then you also look at the running backs and tight ends, and if you're projecting a Darrell Baker or Jarvis Brownlee Jr. to go this week, you might feel not as great as you would if you had L'Jarius Sneed there. And so I think if the Titans team is going to continue to be this defensive powerhouse that we think they can be, L'Jarius Sneed has to stay healthy.
Yeah, and my concern is, like you touched on, the depth behind him, because I think this is going to be a critical component of how this defense functions. I'm actually working on a piece for Stacking the Inbox about this right now, but like 3 things in conjunction with one another: the interior pressure, the blitz affecting quarterbacks, and the coverage holding up outside. I think those 3 working in a symbiotic fashion is going to lead to a pretty good defense. But if L'Jarius Sneed cannot stay healthy, then I think it drastically impacts the defense's ability to function, because I love Jarvis Brownlee Jr., one of my hidden gems in this year's draft cycle. Stoked the Titans picked him up, but I don't know that he's ready to step into a primetime role like L'Jarius Sneed has right now. And beyond that, I think you've got some serious questions about who's going to step up and cover. And Cheeto has injury concerns of his own too that we haven't even talked about. And Roger McCreary, not ideal length to be slid outside. We've seen him play outside, and I think he's a feisty guy, short area quickness. He's a mess in a phone booth kind of player. I like him a lot, but I don't know that he's best served playing outside. I don't know that's where he's at his best. So the ramifications of Sneed not being healthy, not being particularly ready 100% or that sort of thing, I think are massive. And I think it is fair to call that a key to this team's success.
Yeah, I definitely agree. And you can go basically anywhere on this defensive side and say that if one of their main players, their key role players here goes down, you start to not like, if you're just missing one of them at any position on the defense, you start to feel uneasy about that part of the defense because, like we were saying earlier, it feels like if one pin comes loose, everything has the potential to just absolutely crumble. And that's a scary thought for a team who has, for the past 2 or 3 years, had injuries just up and down the depth chart that have just absolutely destroyed this team. And so, I feel like we're quick to throw that aside. The past like that, when you have all of these players who are projected to start this year for the first time for the Tennessee Titans and be an impact from day one. But still, the way that this defensive roster makeup has been constructed, you still have those same concerns of years past, where if you lose one guy, things could really come off the rails.
Yeah, it's like the bolt coming loose on the roller coaster, buddy. You're going to send me into orbit. Whole thing's off the rails.
As we keep going here, we have a couple people in the comments here. Jake, I think, brings up another really interesting one here where he says, I will measure the team based on how they perform solely against the South. If they go 9-8, 8-9, but they get blown out in Indy, Houston, and Jacksonville, I don't know how great I'll feel come the season end. And I think that's an important one because it's a great reality check against your own division here, as this is an ascending division now with 4 teams who feel like they have their quarterback cemented.
Yes.
If you're continuing to fall short with the amount of talent that every team has put around their quarterback that they believe in, I think that is where you'd get into some big trouble here. Ed also saying Levis played really well in clutch moments in the fourth quarter and really comes on down the stretch of the season. I think if you start to see that towards the end of the season, I think that's another key that, could define some success here for the Titans. Stoney, did you have any more here keys for success for this team?
I do. I've got a couple more, and I do want to speak to Jake's point a little bit too, because what is the quickest way, they say, to get to the playoffs? It's to win your division. Correct. So if you fall behind against Indy and Houston and Jacksonville, you're putting yourself in a tougher spot to win that division. So I'm with Jake on that. I think T'Vondre Sweat and Jeffrey Simmons got to stay healthy. They need to play as advertised. When I go back to my argument about how I think this defense will function best, interior pressure. We hear it. It's an old football cliche at this point that quarterbacks hate interior pressure more than stuff coming from the edge because there's nowhere for a quarterback to step up into to make a throw. I think a lot of this defense is going to be predicated on that. I think Simmons and Sweat can be nasty alongside one another this season, but they've got to execute. They've got to show it on the field in meaningful games. I think they have to affect the quarterbacks, whether that is interior pressure, whether that is linebackers, safeties, blitzing, making quarterbacks think twice before they throw. They've got to affect these guys, or quarterbacks are going to eat up over the middle and on screens, getting the ball in space away from the teeth of the Titans defense and making plays. And then lastly, I would say competent special teams as well.
That's something, the last one there, I think, does not go unnoticed, considering that the way they have kind of done their special teams now with new special teams coordinator Colt Anderson. We've kind of seen night and day how it has looked different from years past, and kind of prove that maybe it is in the coaching sometimes outside of the personnel that you're throwing out there. But the biggest one, I think, for sure, is the first one that you bring up there, which is that interior pressure that they're going to have to get. It feels like the way that this defense is predicated, it's and how it is built, it is more so that Denard Wilson is banking on either them getting enough pressure up front to move them out of the pocket, or these cornerbacks winning on the line of scrimmage there in press man to really give the quarterback the trouble. Because if one of the two does not work on any given play, like you said, we like what we seen early in this training camp and throughout training camp from Kenneth Murray, but I think there still are questions about his ability in coverage. Ernest Jones, I think, is a nice player who, once again, is kind of in that Kenneth Murray mold as well, that does a lot more downhill than he does in the coverage game. So if you get those plays where it's not getting home, the blitz gets picked up, and you're giving even a Caleb Williams 4 to 5 seconds in the pocket here to go through his reads, those those wide receivers are going to pick you apart through the middle. And not to mention, I think a big factor that we might get into later this week with this game is how they use Cole Kmet in the middle of the field, how they use that 3 running back tandem of Roschon Johnson, Khalil Herbert, and DeAndre Swift to attack that middle of the field. I think those are some of the big things that you look at a lot of the opponents on their schedule this year and say, if they're not able to generate that pressure at a consistent rate like Denard Wilson wants them to, that's where you see them really get into trouble.
Yeah, I would agree. I had one more key written down here. I forgot to mention, throw a touchdown to John Ojukwu.
Wow. Okay. All right.
You do that,
it has to be him. Okay.
Has to be him.
Yes. It's a guaranteed for sure. That's a good one. I like that one. Would you be a little bit disappointed if it ended up not being John Ojukwu and instead they've been tricking us all along and JC Latham actually ends up getting his designed play there? If it is one.
Yeah, I would be a little disappointed because John Ojukwu, as Brian Callahan explained last week, was explaining to his daughter how reporting as eligible works as an offensive lineman. So I feel like he's got it in the bag. He's worked.
He's put the work in. He's put the flyer in the back of their minds.
But here's a wrinkle. Let's have JC Latham throw the touchdown pass to John Ojukwu.
I mean, the biggest loss of Derrick Henry may not be his ability in the run game, but the ability to throw a 2-yard touchdown into the end zone to an offensive lineman. I think that's something that this team probably is missing and that we haven't talked about enough. So who is that guy that might have to step up? I wouldn't be surprised.
I don't know.
I don't know how that would work either. if he's going to line up on the left side of the line. That's an interesting thought experiment for sure.
I'll have to draw that up and get it to Brian Callahan.
You should, maybe with like a little bit of a paper airplane, like at the game, you like just
at the game. Yeah, I like that.
Throw it right to it and he opens it up. That could work out well.
I like that plan.
I did send this out, this kind of question, posing it to Titans fans, and we can end on this one, which once again, it's the most important one. We've been talking about it, but I couldn't just help the fact that a lot of people are correct in the fact that Will Levis is the key to end all keys. And I think there's different things with Will Levis that kind of culminate into him having the success or not. I think the biggest one from Titan _822 on Twitter, he said, it's Will Levis and nothing else is close. A successful Titans team or season this year at this point is finding out if Will Levis is the guy long term. Will Levis's consistency was another one. But the last one I want to bring up is in one that is probably not talked about a lot, but Kenneth at Texas Sports 1015 on Twitter said, much like the Sean McVay, Jared Goff beginning, coordinating the offense, not trying to be a hero and avoiding turnovers is something that we need to see Will Levis improve in. And I think that's the area that he has to improve in. We talked about last year how many kind of hero effort he's down there somewhere balls that Will Levis would throw. And so I think that is on Will Levis, but also on this offensive coordinator in Brian Callahan to kind of scheme up Will Levis's, the plays so that Will Levis no longer has that and that in the back of his mind that, it's something that I'm just going to throw it and see what happens. And even though it has worked, I think that's one of the biggest factors is if we can see him kind of make those better decisions, I think that's where we start to see the success, and that may be the crux of Will Levis being able to be a viable NFL quarterback or not.
Yeah, and that's saying what I said earlier in a more eloquent way, is just like he needs to rein in some of that stuff, and he needs to learn to be more efficient quarterbacking the team. You talk about it in general layman's terms, I guess, but just going out there and playing quarterback, running the
Yes.
offense, that sort of thing. I think that's the foundation that you need to get to as quickly as you can, and then you build all the sexy fireworks and deep shots and stuff off of that. But just my 2 cents.
Yes, and D Good says, and those plays were more out of necessity because they were that bad. That may also be true. Maybe he won't have to do those anymore. But
Well,
I
he
think
also didn't have time. He's
this is
just like
true. Yes.
getting the ball, and as soon as he catches the ball, there's somebody in the backfield with him, so he's just heaving it down there.
Yes. Well, I think that is going to do it for the first show of the new iteration of the Hot Read podcast. Thank you all for joining us today. At D Good asked in the comments here as well, can we do a Poetry Friday segment? I don't know. Maybe that is is something that I think could be looked into for sure. Zach also said in the comments, we already heard more cussing than any other Hot Read, and this feels like home. And so
I didn't think it was that bad today.
I don't think we were. I think we started out the show strong because we needed to. D Good also saying under an hour in this economy. Yes, well, none of us. We may have gifts. I don't know. The longevity is one of them. That is for sure.
Yeah, I don't know.
But Stoney, thank you so much. I'm so excited for this season. It's going to be a good one. Once again, thank you to Sinkers Beverages and Bluegrass Beverages. If you are in the market looking for your beer, wine, or spirits, make sure you check out Sinkers and Bluegrass. It is your one-stop shop for everything you could ever need in that department. We'll be back on Friday with a little bit more of a variety show, probably breaking down our most exciting matchups for the game this weekend. Of course, the Hot Read podcast, the Hot Read podcast will be back, but the Best Bet Gauntlet will be back on Friday. I'll be bringing you those picks, including the one you should already pick up, which is Titans plus 4.5. That one's going fast, so you should probably pick that one up, make yourself some money this week. Other than that, I think this has been the Hot Read podcast. We'll see you on Friday.